let's hear from Di, shall we?
My little story starts in about June, maybe May last year, and I was just exceptionally tired, and I had finished my second book, which I still don't know how I did 14 quilts in 2 years. So sorry, ladies, there will never, ever, 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 ever be book 3. I just went to my doctors because I thought I'm iron deficient, I'm really tired. And I was just very lucky I had a very diligent GP who decided to take it a step further with some blood tests, and it came back with this abnormal T-cell thing, but they didn't have a clue what it was. So fortunately, my doctor knew this fabulous haematologist at Cabrini Hospital, so I went to see Kirsten Herbert there. And mind you, my GP is Dr. Anna Richards from Hampton, so I go from Hoddles Creek to Hampton for my GP, but I would follow her around the world wherever she lived. Anyhow, I saw Kirsten at Cabrini, and they just couldn't figure out where these weird T cells were coming from. So they ended up doing, I had PET scans and all sorts of things which didn't show anything. So they did this geno test, and it turns out I've got one of those really weird leukemias, I think there might only be one other, that is caused by a genetic mutation. So I've had this in me since I was conceived, so that's why I've got it. So it doesn't respond to normal chemotherapy, and a doctor at the Royal Melbourne could only remember one other patient with this thing called TPLL that I've got in the last 10 years. Now, thankfully, I didn't get it 10 years ago because I would have died. They just didn't know enough about how to treat it. So I started off... Kirsten from Cabrini also works at Peter Mac, and she was very friendly with a guy called Dr. Amit Kott, who Brian and I have now consider him part of our family. And his thing is TPLL, and so he's studied it more than anything else and travels the world lecturing and going to lectures about anyone who's got any information on this disease. So I was fortunate enough to get him. And then fortunate enough that our government, who I won't say I'm 100% happy with, but in this case they were really good, showing my political colours here, because it doesn't respond to normal chemotherapy drugs, they had to get permission to use an immunotherapy drug called alemtuzumab, of which the government gave permission on compassionate grounds to use it, because otherwise I just would have died. So I had to go through a course of immunotherapy and then a bone marrow transplant. Now, I have a brother and a sister, and we both have, the three of us have the same parents. My sister wasn't eligible to be a donor because she's got a B-cell problem, although it hasn't turned it into anything nasty. So my only hope was my brother, who turned out to be a match. So I was really lucky in that I had a sibling donor with the same parents, because that gave me a much better chance of it being successful. So in this time we'd sort of talked a lot, and you talk to other people and, oh no, I could never be a bone marrow donor because it would be so painful. It really is the most fabulous thing you can do. All it is a blood test. People sort of envisage that they drill into your bone marrow and rip it out and transfer it to someone else, and it's really nothing like that. Brian was fortunate enough that I was in my ward at Royal Melbourne, and my brother was in Peter Mac donating his stem cells. And Brian, what did they take? 5,300,000. They actually took 5,300,000 stem cells from my brother, which took nearly the whole day. So it was uncomfortable in that he had to sit with blood coming out of one arm, going through like a milk separator type machine is the best way I can describe it, and then back in the other. So I think 4.5 times the volume of his blood went out and back in again. So anyone can go and get tested to be a blood donor, because you just never know who you might match somewhere, because not everyone gets a match. There are a lot of people in the bone marrow transplant unit at Royal Melbourne who didn't have a relative as a donor. In fact, the majority who didn't have a relative had someone from Germany as their donor, because in Germany you opt out, like it's an opt-out system, so everyone is tested and you're only not tested if you opt out. So we have a lot to thank Germany for, or a lot of people have a lot to thank a lot of donors in Germany. So if you've ever thought about becoming a donor, it is one of the easiest things to do. It's not it is like to the recipient, it is a major organ transplant, because they are replacing your immune system. But for the donor, it's just for the donor, it's just a matter of taking stem cells from their blood. And Brian went over. They didn't get enough stem cells from my brother the first day, so the poor guy had to go back the second day. And Brian went over and watched this machine work, and he said it was just amazing. And it was literally, was it the 1800s, Brian, that when they first designed this machine? I mean, it's obviously changed since the 1800s, but it originally was based on a milk separator. So we're really lucky that, and what Patrick was saying about how lucky we are to be in Melbourne, Peter Mac is mind-blowing. We're in there for the first 10 weeks of my treatment. We were driving in there 3 days a week. We just didn't meet one person who was snitchy, or everyone was really interested. You weren't a patient number, you were actually a person. All the doctors, I have the most fantastic consultant nurse, Ming. He is just mind-blowing. I can message him anytime with any problems and he's back to me in like a couple of minutes. So they really do care about you. So we are so lucky to have that calibre of hospital in Melbourne, and it's a public hospital. So all the services are free. So it's pretty mind-blowing. So I think that's about all I've got to say. Oh, except that I will say my blood levels are going quite well. I've got a slight problem with my neutrophils. All these medical terms that you've got no idea. Last year, would I have had a clue? No. But your neutrophils are your first line of defence with infections. So mine was sort of going up to a decent level, but they've all of a sudden gone down. So they're trying to figure out what's going on there at the moment. In 2 months' time, I start all my childhood inoculations again. So all the things that blew me away when they said you've got to have all your injections again. So that's going to take 18 months to go through the regime. So, but I'm hoping by early next year I'll have a bit of immunity back and be able to get back to a normal life. And I'm not meant to touch the horses for 12 months, but I haven't quite followed that rule. I haven't gardened yet, but that's looming. I can just tell. So, but I'll be very careful when I do stuff like that. So, we desperately need money for foundations like this to, as I say, 10 years ago, I just would have, my lifespan would have been 7.5 months from my diagnosis. So, things advance fairly quickly with the help of research money. So, okay, so thank you.